Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Claude Shirati, and I'm again very happy to be here tonight as we resume our African Knowledge Show, which was interrupted since we went back to Christmas. We actually had one comeback show a couple of weeks ago with one of our guests, and tonight we are talking about Russia, Africa, and the world. To find out more about this, let's just first go to our intro, and we'll be straight back. Thank you very much. As I said, we'll be talking tonight about Russia, Russia in Africa, and Russia in the world. And technology has its mind sometimes, and it doesn't obey me. But finally, it's all in order. So to discuss this topic tonight, I have two guests with me. I have Eugene Ullmann, who is a regular guest in this show. Eugene, how are you tonight?
I'm doing okay, Clyde. How are you doing?
Good, good, thank you. And Barry Mustafa. Again, Barry, he is also a regular guest in this show. Barry, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Clyde. I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
We're talking about Russia, and one thing that is quite good here is that the two of you, all of the guests, you are in a way related to Russia in some fashion. I'll start with Eugene. Eugene, tell us how you're related to Russia.
Well, I was born there. That's a um, I guess a pretty big connection.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family where, although most of my childhood was spent in Australia, but I grew up in a family that was very much connected to Russian culture. My parents were both academics, and my dad was a professor of Russian studies at New South Wales University. So we had a very strong connection with Russia. His mother was from Ukraine. So the family, our family is Jewish. So uh, they were only in Russia since the 1917 revolution, because prior to that, obviously there was the Pale of Settlement, and so their parents came from all sorts of different places. So my heritage is very mixed, but I grew up with a very strong connection with Russia, and I've spent a lot of time there.
Okay. Thanks very
And in
much.
Ukraine, I've spent a lot of time in Ukraine as well.
So you have both Ukrainian and Russian blood in you, isn't it?
I feel connected to both places, definitely, definitely.
All right. Now, Barry, tell us how you're related to Russia.
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm related to Russia, but one thing, the connection that I have with Russia is that that's where I did my university studies.
Yeah.
I went to Russia in 1989. I went to the Soviet Union at the time in 1989. And that was the first time that I set foot outside of Senegal. And it was a discovery. And I love the place because it was the place of my youth. I spent most of my time in Novosibirsk in Siberia, and yeah, so that's the way I would say my connection with Russia has started in 1989 until 1995. I was lucky to travel in most of the 15 republic of the Soviet Union at the time. And I went to Ukraine a few times at the time in the 90s, like even before the 90s, between 89 and 90 and 91. I went to Ukraine, to Kiev, to Odessa, and other places, Kharkov a few times, and beautiful places I have visited. And yeah, so that's the way I feel connected to Russia, a big country and a great
Good.
country. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe the word connected is better than related.
Yeah.
That's all good. It definitely is relevant to Eugene, and for you is connected. In any way,
Yeah.
we're talking about Russia. Before we talk about the war that is happening right now, I want us first to look at how Russia has been, I suppose, getting into Africa over the last few years. Russia has had an aggressive diplomatic policy with African countries. Now, why is that the case? Before, it was more about communism, and after the end of the Cold War, there was not much. But lately, there's even a Russia Africa summit that takes place. I'm not sure if it's every year, or every 2 year. But why has Russia all of a sudden had a lot of interest in Africa?
Who wants to start?
You
You
go.
go ahead, Eugene. You go ahead. Go ahead.
Look, I don't know if it's all of a sudden. I think that it's a history that goes back quite a while, but it's definitely, without going too sort of detailed into the history of it, I think that what happened if we go back to the early days of the Russian Revolution,
Russia has
definitely
an aggressive diplomatic policy.
back to the
Sorry,
early
there's an
days.
echo. Go ahead.
Something's happening here. Okay.
Okay.
Technical
So
issues.
with the Russian Revolution, there was obviously like an internationalist perspective at the time. The Russian Revolution um, saw the working class days of the Russian Revolution of the world. Okay, there's a technical problem here. Can you hear it?
Yeah, there's a bit of a sound. Yeah, I think it's gone now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Russian Revolution initially saw all the working class of the world as one, and was very active in involving African workers into the Comintern, as it was called, the Communist International.
Yeah.
And this changed in Stalin's time, because in Stalin's time, this idea that there's going to be a world revolution of all the working class was basically abandoned. And really, from that point on, from the 1930s, very much, the Soviet Union was essentially using this language of the unity of the working class and everybody uniting, but really they were pretty much promoting the interests of the Soviet Union as a imperialist power.
Mm.
Very much so. So even though the language was still progressive, and of course they invited African students to come to Russia and so on, there was a special university, the Lumumba University, that was set up. So there was a lot of progressive language, but ultimately the agenda was more about promoting the interests of the Soviet Union and making the Soviet Union central to world affairs. And with the African colonial, the struggles against colonialism, the Soviet Union basically was able to offer, in a sense, just like France and Britain, they were able to offer a franchise of their own model that a country could adopt. The one party system, all these things, which they offered to countries like Angola and Mozambique and so on. So I think there's no question in my mind that Russia's interests in Africa are imperialist in nature. That doesn't mean that they haven't done a lot of positive things, like supporting the struggle against apartheid and so on. So I don't want to deny that. But I do think that there was an element of Africa becoming this space. We know about the proxy wars and so on in Africa. It became a space where the rivalries between the superpowers were played out on a so-called neutral ground. And which I think is very much what's happening now in Ukraine. I think Ukraine is very much like the new Angola. It's a proxy war, between the superpowers. And so I think this is a pattern that we can trace, for decades now of the kind of like the Stalinist, methodology.
Okay. Now, Barry, what's
Yeah.
your take on?
What probably I would put in terms of the history of the relationship between the African continent and Russia, or between Russia and the African continent. Eugene is right. It goes back a very long way. I think after the revolution and before the independencies, I think there was this ideological kind of orientation. The African continent at this time was under colonial rule, all the African countries. And I think the aim of all the progressive movements at the time was to help kind of free those countries that were under the colonial rule at the time, whether they were in Africa or in Asia. I think that's where kind of the relationship started. It built up based on that ideological kind of ground of helping other peoples free themselves from domination.
Yeah.
Now, the African continent has benefited a lot in the 1960s, 1970s, in the support that many countries have gotten in fighting for their liberation. Now, I don't think at the time there was some kind of imperialistic intent behind that. I think it was sincere. It was a
Mm.
sincere will to help those countries liberate themselves. Imperialist is nature? I don't think. I think it was more kind of serving the purpose of an ideology. And then after that, the Soviet Union collapsed. And uh, and before that, actually, many students, there are thousands, if not millions of students around the world who have actually benefited from what the Russian ideological kind of and political and cultural approach was at the time, meant to support the education of those third world countries that have gotten out of the domination or that were in the process of getting their freedom. I am one of them, maybe the last generation of Africans who went to the Soviet Union at the time to study.
Mm.
Uh, and yeah, I mean, I have had the opportunity to meet people from all nationalities while I was in the Soviet Union in the late 1980s until the mid 90s. I'm talking about people from India, people from other African countries, people from South America, people from Europe and everywhere. So I think that's where the whole thing started. And today, we have a lot of people around the world and around in the African continent who are in a position of responsibility, who have had their education in the Soviet Union at the time. So the world has changed, but I think the evolution of things are something that dictate the way we coexist. Now, yeah. So what we're seeing today is the product of what was tomorrow. That's what was yesterday. So
But we
so
can't
yeah.
deny that right now, the interest that Russia is displaying in its relationship with African countries is mostly about its economic interest as well as its foreign policy, sort of wanting to kind of balance what the American power has been doing in the continent. Isn't that the case?
No, I totally agree. I think the world is becoming more and more global. One thing, though, is that what we shouldn't be kind of condoning and accepting is saying that Russians don't have the right to go to that part of Africa because it belongs to who and so. I think people have the freedom to go everywhere where they can have economic ties and build economic relationship, as long as it's not a predatory kind of relationship like we used to have in some parts of the African continent. I think the world is becoming global. People need exchange. People need to cooperate. People need to work together, regardless of whether they're Russians, they're Chinese, or they're Cambodian, or whatever it is. We need that. I think it's a good thing.
I
Okay.
think the difference, today, modern, Russia, the Russian state today, doesn't have an ideology that they're trying to, that they represent. So the
Yeah.
Soviet ideology, whether you believe that it was genuine or whether you believe that it was corrupted after Stalin and it was hypocritical and so on, but nonetheless, as Mustafa pointed out, from in terms of the actual people doing it, whatever the leaders thought or planned, but in terms of the people who were committed to international programs and education and so on, they were genuine about doing it, and they were genuine about unity with African countries that were struggling for independence. They were genuine about education and so on, and they had a real program of internationalism that was robust, that was real. Today, the Russian state doesn't have an ideology. It's basically a capitalist state run by oligarchs. It doesn't mean, however, that Russians are a diverse population. We're talking about one of the biggest countries in the world, and so the Russians that you see in Africa, whether they're engineers or they're running businesses, for example, like for example, the Russian experience of banking in Nigeria is extremely positive. You know, the Russians that partner on with banks with Nigerians, sort of as an equal partnership, and they're
Yes.
one of the most effective. You know, so it's
That, that's
basically
that's
yeah,
that's basically what you're highlighting. That's what I was referring to. That's
yeah,
what we need.
yeah,
We need that different
exactly,
perspective,
exactly.
and that diversity. I totally agree with you. I think the ideology is not there anymore. But still, like kind of, we are a global world today, and people
Totally.
are going where they have interest. People where they go where they can have kind of can see opportunities. Now, one thing that we don't want to condone, and we won't become actually condone in the African continent today, the young people have understood a lot of things that they didn't understand. Yes, in the 1960s, that it's not acceptable to come and have predatory intent. So being Russians or French or Chinese or whatever and all that, people are waking up to these realities. And I think whatever we experiencing today with the Russian approach, Russian partnership, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we leave what is doing in Africa and then talk about the war in Ukraine, we know that Russia has not just been going in Africa for economy; they also want to have some political leverage, whether that is for the service of the economy or simply because they want to reaffirm their power position on the international stage. I'm not sure, but we see them playing a more active role, namely in Mali and Central Republic. What you read about what Russia is doing over there? Quickly, politically.
Eugene, you go and
Look,
I'll go
look.
next year.
Okay. Look, there's no question in my mind that Russia wants to be a dominant superpower in the world. I think that that's not controversial because they themselves say it all the time, right? It's
Hmm.
not a they themselves say like there's a phrase in Russian that people repeat, which is basically like, what a shame about the super, like, we feel pain for the superpower. We feel pain that we're the pain of not being that superpower anymore that we were.
Hmm.
So, and and to be fair, this is not it's not always a negative thing because, for example, Russia has a culture of sponsoring every field of science and research in the universe that you can imagine, because they believe that they have to have experts in every single field in the planet. So any kind of minority language in Asia that has 100 people only speaking it, there will be state-funded experts in Russia researching that. Right, this idea that we need to be everywhere, we need to have expertise on everything. This is very much a part of the Russian mindset and the Russian way of thinking. So in some senses, it's a positive thing because they promote science, they promote knowledge, and so on. Definitely, there is an idea that um, they want to be a serious player and influential in every aspect of world politics and economics. The question here really is just the methodology. I
Mm.
think the question that we have to look at is, to what extent. I mean, my experience, what I hear when I've traveled in Africa, is generally African people who've had experience of Russians don't have a negative attitude to them, in the sense that they don't feel that Russia imposes things and like forces African countries to do things they don't want to do. Are they acting in their own interests? Of course they are, absolutely, without question. And I think that they're entitled to do that. Every country does that. But yeah, I mean, in my mind, do they want to be a dominant force in Africa? Absolutely, 100%.
Okay,
Yeah,
Barry,
and
what?
I think they should, because
Yeah.
one thing is that I think you're right. I mean, uh, Russia has been longing for a long time for the status of superpower that the country had in the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia went into a period of lethargy or even actually backwardsness, like under Yeltsin, for a good 10, 15 years, Russia was languishing in crisis, and population was in poverty, and the economy was in disarray and everything and all that. But in the last 20 years, a lot has changed. The country has actually found it's actually standing up on its feet. They're actually becoming more assertive. There are a lot of things that they used to accept before, or they used to tolerate, that they can't accept anymore, because they feel that they can say no. They feel that they have kind of uh, that they feel that they are back. Russia feel that Russia is back, and a lot of things that they, like I said, they were accepting before. They were not saying anything about certain things. They're saying something now. They haven't started to be present in the African continent. I think they were always, like I said, a lot of many countries in the African continent had very strong military ties with Russia for many years. Okay, and in that field, actually, Russia probably has always been present since the 1960s, with many countries where they have been training their military, providing kind of all their arms and all that what they need, and providing expertise and stuff like that. This has been always there. It's not new. So I think what is new is that they're actually going into countries that people have never seen them before, like Central African Republic. It's been always a country that have been always under French rule or under French dominance, and now Russians have their expertise over there, and it doesn't make everyone happy, which is quite normal, and it's okay. And I don't think they're going to be backing down, and I think a lot is going to change, and we are witnessing kind of a turning point in the international relationship when it comes to Africa. Now, the only thing that I need to highlight is that we will need to note that every country, be it Russia, be it Turkey, be it China, or everyone, and even India, is actually building up a strategy on how to get into the African continent, get into the resources of the African continent. Now, the question is, do the Africans have a strategy around their own resources, around the interests of their own people? And that's what is important. I think it's quite important that we do have our strategy. Now, whether our leadership does understand that and prepare themselves into that, that's a problem. And that's where we need to prepare. It's a good thing that everyone want to have relationship with us, want to have kind of build relationship. It's very good, but we need to be smart about it and see how we can make sure that we are not on the losing end.
I think that's a crucial point. I think that's a really important point that Mustafa is making, and I think we've talked about this previously on the show about this idea of the West promoting this mentality in Africa that we are helping you and you can't survive without us, and for us to help you, you need to fulfill certain conditions and so on and so forth. But the reality is that all of these major powers actually desperately need African resources and a lot that Africa offers. And Africa is in a position to start dictating terms and to start to reverse this trend and to say, well, actually, like for us to help you, you need to fulfill certain conditions, and you need to respect certain things that we want as well. And that's what I really want to see happening. I want to see, I really want to see, potentially a more united Africa can actually start dictating terms in a much more, much more aggressive in a positive way. Yeah, aggressive in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope that Africa will learn its lessons after what it has gone through with the Western powers. And we know that it's not only Russia, it's China, it's in India, Turkey, all these other countries that are going into Africa to do business. So hopefully, the African countries will wake up and know how to defend their interests and how to relate to these countries in a win-win type of framework rather than
And that's the
exploitation.
thing that I would like to add there. I think we shouldn't be like kind of hope. I think we should organize ourselves as the African in the diaspora to see how we can exert some influence in making
Mm,
sure that we are not just waiting and hoping that it's going to happen. We do
yeah.
have a say. We should have a say, and I think the leadership in the African continent, actually, a lot of these people actually are hoping that they'll get our expertise and our help to make sure that we are able to dictate, or at least to be assertive in the building of these new relationships. And we need to be part of the game. It's very important that we do.
Yep, we do need to be part of the game. We do need to be active, and which is why we are, as far as we're concerned anyway, in these sort of platforms, we're trying to encourage this type of discussions, and from the discussions go into actions where through networks we're trying to put strategies together and be able to do things. When we will achieve better result when we are united, and when we can do things in a unified and coordinated manner. But that's perhaps another topic. We'll talk another day about how to best get the diaspora exercise that influence in the politics back in the mother continent. It's obviously not an easy thing, but it can be done. Now let's go back to. Let's now go to the war. Now, Russia has not only been aggressive on the international stage and in terms of its foreign policy, but now they have really gone into war. They invaded another independent countries, even though when you hear what Putin is saying, it looks like for him, Ukraine has never really been an independent country. Eugene, you probably are better, positioned to trying to explain to us what's Putin's psychology and understanding of how he sees Ukraine, which I think is the reason why he has decided to invade.
Look, I think there's two separate issues there. There's how Russia sees Ukraine, how Ukrainians and Russians see each other. I don't know if Putin's decision to invade is completely connected to that, but I'll briefly summarize that as I understand it. And which, look, basically, here's the thing. The divisions in identity between the various Slavic people are quite recent, right? Basically, the Russian people, the Russian culture, the Russian identity actually began in what is today Ukraine. So the very first Russian state that existed, the very first Russian entity that existed, was the Kievan Rus. It was Russia in Kiev. So Kiev was the capital. Obviously, Kiev is the capital of Ukraine today, but Kiev was the capital of the first Russian state. And the people were identified as Russians. They were a mix of various, Baltic and East European and West Asian, ethnic groups, but they developed this identity through, cultural, language, religion, and so on. And it was based in Kiev. So Russia began in Ukraine. Then they were pushed out because of the Mongol invasions. So the Mongol invasions basically pushed them towards, initially, to a city called Novgorod, which means new town in Russian. So it was like literally new town. And then from there, they basically merged with a Finnish, merged and began to dominate basically people who were kind of like essentially Finns who were living around the Moscow area, and that became the new kind of epicenter of Russia. So all of these areas are very mixed. You have areas that are. I have this experience personally of being in this region that is on the border of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, this triangle where the three countries meet. And if you talk to the people there and you ask them, what language do you speak? Like, what is your language? Is it Russian? Is it Ukrainian? Is it Belarusian? They don't know. They just say, this is just our language. This is how we speak. Right? Because the language is a mix of the things. So the identity is very mixed. If you travel around Ukraine, I always, for years, I've always recommended Ukraine as a country to travel in. I think for a traveler, it's an incredible place because everywhere you go in Ukraine, all the different regions, Mustafa, if you've traveled in Ukraine, I'm sure you'll agree with me. All the different regions, you go to a different part of the country, it feels like you're in a completely different country.
Yeah.
Right? Because Ukraine was never one country. It was always like the first time that Ukraine became a single entity as a country was actually when it became part of the Soviet Union in 1917. That's how recent the entity of Ukraine is. And
Mm,
I'm not saying like I don't want I'm you know I know that like obviously there were Ukrainian poets in the 19th century and the idea started to develop, and this is in no way like disrespectful to Ukrainian culture, but it
hmm.
is a fact that it was never a single entity. It was never there was never a country called Ukraine the way that we understand it today until the Soviet Union made it that, right?
Okay.
Um, and in the western part of the country, sorry, in the eastern part of the country, people don't really speak the Ukrainian language. Like where my family comes from, my grandmother's family, if you go there today to Kharkov and these places, people don't generally speak Ukrainian. They don't really know it very well, and so on. So the identities are very mixed up, and there's no animosity. There's not like there's a hatred between Russians and Ukrainians or anything like that. That's not really what's happening at all.
Mm,
So yes, of course, there's Ukrainian nationalists who resent the fact that Russian culture is, more dominant, if you will, in the region and the world and so on.
mm,
Definitely. But there isn't like a rivalry or a hatred between these people. They're very much intertwined and they're very much related, and there's a strong synergy between them. So it's not an ethnic conflict at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I
okay.
actually have witnessed that when I went to a
Mm,
few times I went to Ukraine between 89 and 91. At the time, I think absolutely you're right. Ukraine is a fantastic place. It's so diverse, even physically with people. They look and all that. You go to Odessa, people are different. If you look at the morphology of people, they are basically the product of mixed races, of mixed kind of nationalities, and beautiful people, like the traits are beautiful. They have this mix of kind of whether you call it uh, Asian and Europeans,
Turkish.
other
Yeah.
part of Europe, Turkish and all that. With It's a beautiful mix, And talking about languages, I remember in 1990, that's where I actually have seen a group of nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, who were actually demonstrating. There were less than 10 people. They had what is currently the flag of Ukraine today. And they were actually demonstrating. I think the movement was called Ruch, RUX, Ruch, and they were actually demonstrating. Everyone was actually looking at them like strange people, crazies, and all that, because they were a group. They were seen as a group of troublemakers, And at the time, in the 90s, it was very rare to see a person who speak Ukrainian, because everyone spoke Russian. It's only with that national movement and after it became independent, then more and more like people started embracing going back to their culture, going back to Ukrainian as a language and stuff like that. And it happened in the space of this from 1990 to 2000, where really kind of there was this cultural revival, But other than that, before that, you're absolutely right. My understanding was that people saw themselves as Soviet people, as Soviet citizens, So
Okay.
that's exactly what the way I recall,
So
like in the 1990s.
is that then the reason why Putin thinks, based on what he's saying, that uh, sort of Ukraine is kind of just another part of Russia that has sort of
Yeah, this is
been
probably
put away?
part of the well, maybe that's part of his thinking. But the other thing also, I think, whether it's Putin or anyone else wouldn't have any problem with that, with Ukraine being kind of a separate country or separate entity. I don't think Putin's intent is to recolonize or to take over and whatever. I think they would be fine as long Ukraine doesn't become part of NATO,
Mm,
because the whole problem, like, is about that, you know. Uh, 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 what we said, what Eugene has highlighted earlier, is actually that people think that Ukrainian and Russians are all their cousins, they the same people and all that. Now, seeing your cousin being allied to someone that you see or that sees you as your bitter enemy and that is living next door, I think that's where the problem is. Everyone probably in Putin's mind, and everyone who actually see things the way he sees it, everyone would have been okay if Ukraine didn't push so much to become anti Russia and becoming part of NATO. I think that's where the problem is. I think the whole problem is that Ukraine wanting to turn their back on their cousins, Russians, and allying with their bitter enemy. That's
Now,
why
the
I
question
look
that
at it.
comes with that, question that comes is that, Eugene, is
Yeah.
that is that willingness? I mean, the fact that Ukraine is getting closer to NATO or to the Western Bloc,
Hmm.
and then and away from Russia, is that actually coming from Ukrainians themselves, or it is the influence of the Americans?
Look, I think that there is I mean, the sort of, the Putin kind of thing that, Ukraine is run by Nazis and so on. I
Mm,
mean, yes, it's true that there is a very right-wing element that has been in control in Ukraine since the Maidan uprisings and so on. In fact,
mm,
Zelensky, the current president, he was actually elected on a platform of bringing Ukraine closer to Russia, right? He actually wanted to reconcile and so on.
mm,
However, Ukraine is in this strange position because, let's face it, and I mean, at no point, I have to make this clear, I'm not justifying Russian military action at all
mhm,
currently in terms of what Putin is doing and the army. I think it's a catastrophe. I think it's tragic. I'm not justifying it at all because I believe that even though Ukraine has a lot of problems in terms of right wing policy and corruption and a lot of different things, I just don't believe that Russia is the solution to those problems, right? I don't
mm.
think Russia is able to solve them, and they're not for Russia to solve. But I think we have to. I think it's true. It's true that Ukraine has already become a member of NATO in everything but name, right? I mean, they're effectively part of that bloc,
and
and
that's exactly where the problem is, Eugene, because
yeah,
they have
yeah,
effectively been. That's what has actually
exactly,
put
100%
not Yeltsin to the edge. What's his name? Putin to the edge, and said
Putin,
we're gonna put an end to this because we have tolerated enough. It's not gonna go any further, and that's where
100%,
the
yeah,
problem is.
But the issue for
100%,
me,
Yeah.
yeah,
I guess I'm not sure if you answer the question. Is I suppose is a very tricky balance to strike when
yeah.
if we accept that Ukraine is an independent country, and then they have the right to make their own decisions. We understand they will
Well,
some of
yes.
those the decisions will upset their neighbor, and we also understand that the U.S. has been quite aggressive trying to expand
Well,
NATO.
yeah.
They
Okay.
haven't been only aggressive in their climate, they actually have been meddling.
Yeah.
Because the Maidan Revolution, in many ways, there is a documented like evidence on that, that the
Yeah.
U.S. embassy in Kiev has been very instrumental in helping the Maidan uprising and financing it and influencing the outcome, and
100%.
during and after.
Hmm.
That's the reality.
But
So definitely, I think that's a problem.
let's look at the even broader context, right? I mean, let's go back to when the Soviet Union disintegrated, right? We're talking about the early 90s, right? The United States essentially adopted a policy explicitly, right, to make sure that they would be the only superpower, that there would not be any major global competitor to their hegemony, right? So then we saw the Persian War, the Gulf War. We saw the Serbia, the invasion of Afghanistan, the Second Iraq War, Libya, Syria, and so on. Right now, we understand that the United States. We've heard them talk about it. They have been planning explicitly for a military confrontation with Russia and China. This has been building up for years now, right? So so basically the idea that people had that the Soviet Union would fall and now everybody would just become, China becomes capitalist, everybody becomes pro-American, and there's this new era of global, peace, and everybody's happy and everybody gets rich. This is not really what's happening, right? Clearly. And I think there has been a preparation for war by Americans. There has been a push towards war. Australia is also, like this sort of hostilities with China and so on. And I think what we're seeing now is very much a proxy war between, Russia and United States / NATO. I don't really think that what the policies of the Ukrainian government have anything to do with it, quite frankly, like just as a separate country.
Okay. Do you guys see any end to this? I think Putin is quite determined to go all the way, regardless of the amount of damage that.
I hope there will be an end to this. I hope kind of reason will prevail, and they will sit down and agree on terms and make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. I'm going to repeat here something that is self-evident. I think the reality is, I think since the collapse of the Soviet Union, if we really agree that there is no more Cold War, NATO doesn't have reason to exist. Okay, and the whole thing about the military alliance and all that, it's just, I find it absurd. Military alliance to ally against whom? If really the Western world is sincere about the fact that kind of there is no more Cold War, everything is fine and all that, NATO shouldn't exist. Okay, the fact that we have NATO and we have NATO kind of expanding, accepting everyone, but not accepting Russia to be part of NATO, and pointing and using not accepting Russia to be part of NATO, and pointing all the missiles and everything towards Russia, that doesn't leave anyone comfortable. If I were Russia, if the US was Russia, they wouldn't agree with that.
But does that justify invading another country?
No, invading another country is never justifiable. But again, let's not fool ourselves and pretend it's something new. The US has invaded countries. The European countries have invaded countries. France have invaded countries. It's not the first time it's happening, even in this century. It's not even in the last 20 years. It has happened before, and it's still happening. It's going to continue happening. I'm not saying that I justify it. I think it's completely wrong, but it's something that happened before. Why did people who are screaming and crying today didn't scream and cry yesterday when it was happening? It was done by others. We just need to be kind of less hypocritical about it, and just look at it the way it is. So it's wrong. Invading any country is wrong, but again, it did happen before.
Last thing before we end with this conflict, there is obviously that's very strong possibility that it may lead to a third world war. It may lead to a whole nuclear annihilation of not just Ukraine, Russia, and Europe. It can be a danger to the whole world. And it looks like Putin is a type of person who can actually make this happen.
No, I don't think so. I don't believe that we're going to get to a third world war. I don't believe that is going to get to that. I think the Europeans are not going to get in. The Americans are not going to get in. And as you see, they are actually sitting very far away and just pointing the finger and talking, but they're not going to get into it. And I don't think any German, any French, we're gonna be getting into there and shedding their blood for another country in Europe. I don't think
Eugene, what do you think about that? Because there has been already some.
Yeah.
Just before I let you speak, there's been already some Russian air power. I mean, Russian warplanes that have crossed the border to go into Sweden, and that is a problem. Notwithstanding the fact that, as you mentioned earlier today, there's been an attack that was going to that nearly affected the nuclear plant in Ukraine. All that,
Yes.
you can start a war, you think you can control it, but it can escalate.
Look, I think it can. I don't think the possibility isn't there, but I do agree with Mustafa. I don't think that. I don't really think it's going to happen. And I think part of it is to do with, in all honesty, I don't think that Putin was even planning to attack in the first place, right? I actually don't think that he planned to do it. To me, when I look at what the Russians are doing, it looks like they're making it up as they go along. I think that he was pushed into a position, he was provoked to the point where for him not to do it would make him look weak. But we can see that basically the reason they're bombing now is because they failed to take a single city, right? They basically, yes, you can have you can be a big superpower and you can have a huge army and everything, but if you don't have the economy and the infrastructure to support that, right? I mean, 20 billion US dollars a day that war is costing them. I think they would think when they went into it, they thought it'd be over in 3-4 days. I really don't think they have an end game or a strategy. Can it go to nuclear war in World War III? Look, potentially, yes. I mean, it can escalate, but I don't see it happening right now. I think that, quite frankly, I think for now, everyone's going to look for a way out of it that will allow them to also save face and not be embarrassed by the situation to some
Okay.
extent.
Well, we're coming to the end. I'm gonna give you 1 minute to conclude before we go. Barry, what would be your final thought on this
Yeah,
whole Russia thing?
my final thought on this. I hope they will sit down and talk. I hope that there will be negotiations and come to an agreement. No one needs war. I think war is not good for people. I think people need peace, and the Ukrainians have gone through a lot, and they really don't need this war. And I think reason should prevail. I'm hoping in the next few days there will be kind of good opportunities to make peace and for the Russian army to withdraw and to agree to what the status of Ukraine is going to be. Everyone to agree on that, and just to make sure that everyone is actually feel safe and comfortable. That's what I'm hoping.
Eugene?
Look, I don't have much more to add except just to say that I think that what we're seeing with the actual interaction between the Russian and the Ukrainian soldiers when they meet and so on, they don't want to be doing this, right? I mean, the Russian soldiers are running out of food and fuel, and they're knocking on, doors in Ukrainian villages, and people are giving them bread. The Russians, apparently, Russia failed to take Odessa because the soldiers refused to do it. Right. I think people are, on the ground, actual normal people don't have a conflict, and they are able to get along. And that's where, this idea of just focusing on solidarity and focusing on kind of international unity against the bigger interests, I think becomes super crucial, as opposed to labeling people by where they come from and so on. I think, we really have to understand that, I mean, again, I'm probably making a very basic point, but ultimately normal people know how to get along, and the war is not about their conflict. And that's what we need to emphasize, and that's what we need to promote, that as much as possible, that idea.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for your contribution to this discussion tonight. We all hope that the war will end sometime soon and that it will not escalate, because obviously there are people who are dying. There are a lot of issues that people have to deal with, and it's something that can affect not just the two countries involved, but the whole world. And some of us are likely going to feel it in some ways, even through cost for fuel and all that sort of thing, even if we are miles and miles away from where the conflict is happening. So we will continue to talk about such issues on this platform, African Knowledge. Barry Mustafa and Eugene Ullmann, thank you again for your contribution tonight. And until next time, stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Clyde. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.